Thank you, Scott. It's good to see a lot of friends and familiar faces, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to come here today to be with you. Scott is right about part of that, and the first part, when the money is tight, nobody wants to come see you. They just hope you keep their budget level. They hope you don't cut them too much. When you have a lot of money, like we do right now, I can barely get into the office before I've got people pulling on my arm to try to meet with me, but that's okay. That's part of it. I do want to talk to you historically for just a few minutes about what we have seen and what we look at in our state budget, and then I want to talk about a little bit of forecasting too. I think I've got 10 minutes. Is that right, Scott? Reminds me, 10 minutes. I've jotted down a few notes as I was walking in, and I think it was Woodrow Wilson that said it first, that somebody said, well, how long, he asked the question, somebody said, would you come speak? And he said, how long do I have to speak? And they said, does it matter? He said, sure it matters. And he goes, if you want me to speak for 10 minutes, I need a week to get ready. If you want me to speak for 30 minutes, I need a day to get ready. If you want me to speak for an hour, I'm ready right now. So that's kind of the way I feel about speeches too. If you want to keep it succinct and concise, you really need a lot of time to focus in on some of the important issues. So let's talk about where we are in state government. Most of you know we've got unprecedented excess dollars. The tax dollars are moving in quite nicely, maybe too much because, again, I'm super busy trying to keep up with all the demands. One of the things that I have looked at since I've been Appropriations Chairman is to look at the historic revenue collection and expenses in state government. When I look at revenues in Mississippi, since the time I was elected, which is I started in 2008, we've essentially grown in the state by about 1.5% per year, which is roughly keeping up with inflation. If you go way back in Mississippi, you'll see that our growth has been about 2.5, 2.6%, and inflation has been about 1.6%. And that's factoring in the good years and the bad years. When I came into the legislature, we immediately hit a bad year. That was when the recession started in 2008 and things got really difficult. And so we had some lean years, but we had a few good years in there too. But when you factor it out over the 14 years, you're at about 1.5% growth. Well, suddenly in 2020, and I'm going to stop, it's the fiscal year 2021. In 2020, things were trucking along pretty nicely. We were about $200 million in excess of what our expected revenues were that year. Overnight, 1 month, we lost over $240 million when the pandemic hit. And suddenly we were upside down on that year's budget. We set a very austere budget for the following year, the FY 2021 budget. I'm sorry, FY 22 budget. We set a pretty austere low budget. We cut a few $100 million out of what we expected previously. But then came the federal money, and we were flush in cash. And then I think one good thing, and I'll give credit to a lot of leaders around the state, including the governor and many others in their communities, my legislative colleagues, Lieutenant Governor, and many others, that said we need to try to get back to work as quickly as we can. We need to get things going safely and securely as best we could. And so money started coming in for other reasons too, because we had a lot of productivity compared to some of our neighboring states and certainly around the country and other parts of the world. So combine those two things, the federal funds and a pretty good productivity in Mississippi, and you had about $1 billion in excess of what we expected. Keeping in mind we had cut the budget a few $100 million, few $100 million, and then all this money came pouring in. Well, things have continued to be the same way, and frankly, as we talk about forecasting, I expect the next couple of years to be pretty good. Today in the Senate, we passed our second round of ARPA bills, American Rescue Plan bills. Those will go back to the House again. Some of those should be final passage, some will go to conference. And I expect that between the road and the road money, by the way, the Senate, a bill that I was proud to author, we put $300 million into emergency road and bridge repair funds. We expect the federal government money from the infrastructure package to come down and also create job opportunities and create growth and fix up our roads and bridges in the state of Mississippi. But with the ARPA funds, we had $1.8 billion, and we're trying to hustle those out in the Senate. We're really working hard to get those funds out as quickly as possible because we know that communities, in some cases the state too, needs, some of our buildings need water and sewer upgrades. And that's going to be the biggest portion of what we propose to spend out of the ARPA funds. But we've also got money for mental health. We've got money for child protective services. We've got funds for other R&R projects around the state, not to mention tourism and a number of others that have what we hope to put into the economy. So you're going to see $1.8 billion worth of funds, hopefully in the next year or two, go out, but also will help the economy grow and help keep dollars circulating around our communities. It's interesting, talk about the hands being out, Scott. $1.8 billion of Gcrf funds, and I had roughly $8.7 billion of requests that came in to my office. So stop and think about that. And while I'm on that, on the general funds this year, we're looking at somewhere around a $6.5 billion budget. Give or take a couple hundred million. That sounds funny saying give or take a couple hundred million, but that's when you're dealing with those kind of numbers, you have to start looking at it that way a bit. But I've got $750 million of extra requests on top of that $6-some-odd billion that we will look at. That's just agency requests. That's not some of the other things that you see around the state in your local communities. So a lot of additional money coming out. And I've heard this before. My predecessor, Buck Clark, used to say, the bad news, folks, is that we have got $1 billion of excess requests in our state budget this year. The good news, it's the same $1 billion they requested last year. So, you look at that sometimes and you go, well, I think they're functioning pretty well without the $750 million. And for the most part, I think a lot of agencies can continue to function pretty well. They have want lists and they have needs lists. And I think we have to look at the needs list at the Capitol, and sometimes the want lists are not quite able to be met, and probably the needs lists aren't able to be. The needs lists are met, the want lists are not always met. Let me mention a few other things I think are really important as we go through this final few weeks of the session. We've got Gcrf funds for you coast folks. I ran into a few on the way in. That's a big deal for the coast. That's the Gulf Coast Restoration Fund. About $30 million a year going into that. There's about $10 million of BP funds that are spent around the rest of the state. We certainly have to get to that soon, in addition to ARPA funds that need to be going out. We're looking at tax relief. I'm sure you guys keep an eye and an ear to the ground, an eye on what's going on and an ear to the ground, so you know kind of what's going on there. But we have some competing plans and tax relief between the Senate and the House, and that'll have to be negotiated. We've got another big one, people want to talk about, and I've got to do a radio interview in a few minutes, and I suspect they're going to ask me about capital expense funds. We've got about $1 billion in capital expense funds this year. And we typically look at capital expense and bonds as the two measures, or the two vehicles that we use to try to fix up some things that may have fallen into disrepair in the state, a few projects that we think can accelerate economic development. Those kind of things, they're big ticket items where we really think we can grow our state. CapEx funds are about $1 billion, $1.1 billion, but we've essentially spent some of those funds, if we can follow through with what we said, $300 million of that going to roads and bridges. We've got other money that's going into some projects that we know are going to be taking place. I want to see us do, and I've talked with a few of the other leaders in the legislature, make sure that we position ourselves with our economic development opportunities so that when we're ready to roll as a state and recruit businesses and offer jobs, that we've got the right sites, we've got the right people, we've got the right resources in place. Because most of you know, in the economic development world, they're going to be looking at a few things that are important. They're going to look at money, of course, that's always important. They're going to look at risk and what their risk is as a company to locate and be here, but they're going to look at speed. And I want to take care of the speed problem right now. This is an opportunity for Mississippi to invest in its future and make the kind of commitment that's going to position us well. However we come out of all this pandemic stuff, right now we're in a good spot, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have some downturn after some of these federal funds kind of flush out through the economy. But I want Mississippi to be positioned where we can excel. We're going to leapfrog other states because our education's better in the state, because we've got the right leaders in the state, and because our economic development tools are in place for us to excel. So I want you to help us and support us and give us ideas about what we can do to make us the most economically friendly state in the country. So I'm happy to be with you today. I know the lieutenant, y'all don't want to hear from me anyway, the lieutenant governor's in the back, and he's probably saying, Hopson, get off the stand, and I need to get it finished and do some other work. So good to be with you, and I look forward to visiting with you as we exit here later today. Thank you very much.